So after the last video, there was a question about why I used just a little bit of clay and pressed it in on the neck here for the seam, and why I didn't score. And it's a good question. Why did I do that? I don't really have a great answer. The clay is leather hard and I'm adding wet clay. And so in the inside, this is essentially what it looked like, you know, on the inside when I had that seam. I added kind of a big thick coil of clay like this, and I scored it, and I added some slip before I added that coil on. Now it was a bigger coil, and so then I compressed it into space, or into that crack, and made a point of using a lot of pressure, but also kind of smearing it up and down across that seam. And that's why that seam is invisible on the inside. Now you can see I've made a bit more of a mess. I've kind of cleaned it up too, but I've made a bit more of a mess here on that side than when I used just a little bit of clay here. But it's a valid question whether what I'm doing right here by pressing it in is going to stay or stick, as well as where I've scored and slipped it. So by scoring and slipping, I've roughed up the clay and I've added some moisture. Both of those are going to help kind of hold on to that wet clay. Over here I've taken leather hard and just pressed a smaller amount, but a wet clay onto it. If I left this out right now, it would dry and I'd worry about it cracking. The other thing, oops, here's one. The other thing that I planned to do, and maybe didn't really show, is that I'll probably come back with something like this. And this little flexible red rib, or the one you can buy locally is a little bit thicker but does a similar sort of thing. These kinds of, basically applying flexible pressure onto that seam is going to help push those pieces of clay together. I could do the same thing on the other side after I've added the scoring and slipping, and you can see that the clay is a little bit wetter as I smear across here. It's dragging a little bit differently. But in both of these, I'm strengthening the clay. Both of those ways I'm strengthening the clay. And both of those ways I'm pretty confident about the attachment. When you do it, I always recommend you score and slip as often as you can. And sometimes you're kind of, you're in a rush, you've scored the other side, and you aren't as careful on this side. Make sure it dries nice and slow. So I also wanted to attach the ponytail, and one of the things I wanted to show you about the ponytail is that because of how it was sitting, it's ended up all kind of wonky. It doesn't fit quite right. It's still flexible enough that I can press it back into place, and I'm keeping an eye on those marks, those key marks, to get it lined back up. In fact, I had a little key that I did inside here, and we can see that seam. I'm going to score that and add a little bit of clay into that seam. Oh, look, I forgot slip. The clay's a little bit wetter, and I can get away with not using slip here. If I'm worried about it, or if it's a stronger connection, I'll probably use slip there like I did all through the middle here. So I'm going to try to fairly quickly throw this thing together, and then I'm going to show you how I'm going to support this. So I'm going to be fairly quick on my slip application here. I can always come back and clean it up a little bit later. I'm going to line up my key marks, line them up here, oops, squish it so that it lines up correctly. I've got a little gap here that's developed at some point, a little crack, or maybe I cut that line too close, but I can come back and work on that later. Now, when I go to attach this here, if I just score and slip that, I'm going to have to be really hopeful that it'll stay up, but I don't expect that it'll stay up because gravity is going to bring it down. It's really tempting to do something like this, and, oh, that's actually right about the right size. I could score and slip this and hold it up. This is a bad idea. And if you think about clay and what's going to happen with this whole part and plastic, you should be able to figure out what the problem is going to be, right? This looks like a perfect support for this. But the clay of her head, of her neck, of her shoulders, and her ponytail, all of that is going to shrink as it dries. Plastic is not going to shrink. At least this plastic is not. If I had a piece of foam that's about the same size, that would work. But a better bet, a better thing for me to use here as a support would be a chunk of clay. And it's not very pretty, it's not very easy, I mean it's not that hard, but it's not the easiest solution because grabbing something like that seems so tempting. But if I put this under here, first of all I can get it to line up and be exactly the right height. Got to score and slip this, okay? I'm going to do that. But if I get these pieces together and I score and slip right there, and then this is the support, I can move this lady around on her board. The scoring and slipping will help keep this seam tight. And this underneath, we're actually, technically, we're going to call this an armature. This is an external support as opposed to the armature that was inside her. This is going to be able to dry with the clay. They're both going to shrink at a similar rate. And so as she shrinks down, it's not going to stress this seam. If I had the plastic in place, what would happen is the plastic's not going to move, so something else would have to give. And we'd end up with a crack in her neck or a crack at her seam somewhere, wherever the stress kind of forced the clay to give way. All right? So if you have a piece like this, or a piece that needs some extra support, you can make yourself a little clay support. This support could be fired if it needs to be, but I'm going to plan on having this be such a nice, secure, maybe even reinforced on the outside seam, that she's going to be able to be fired without this section. All right? And that's what you should do if you've got a piece that needs some extra support. I'm going to continue working on her, but I'm not going to have you guys watch that in the video. Thanks.